NBC Legal Services. The NBC Legal Department consists of qualified lawyers who handle generic and complex legal issues applicable to the retirement fund industry. In addition to our legal services, we offer free legal seminars as a tool to equip our trustees and employers with the appropriate technical knowledge through frequent seminars hosted across the country. For more information, please see our website www.nbc.co.za or contact us on info@nbc.co.za.
Good morning and welcome to NBC's third legal webinar of the year. My name is Nicole Makologo. I am a legal advisor at NBC, and today I will be your MC and introducing you to all of our speakers and our topics of the day. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to firstly let you know that today we will be talking about the two-pot system, what it means and how it affects all the different industries, how it will affect members, how it will affect funds, investments. All of those kinds of topics will be discussed today, and therefore the entire webinar is going to be dedicated to the two-pot system and what it means to every single one of us. So firstly, before I get into the housekeeping issues, I wanted to just ask everyone a quick poll question. You will see that on your screen. You will have a pop-up to pick a response, and then I'll let everyone know and give feedback as to regards to how's everyone feeling about the two-pot system. So the question of the day is, what is your stand on the two-pot system? Are you for it or are you against it? So now let's get into the housekeeping issues. So for today's webinar, please note that the CPD certificates will not be issued right now as of right after the webinar, but they will be issued at a later stage. Everyone will be recorded, and therefore, once you have recorded and registered, watched the entire video, you will receive a link in days to come that will allow you to download your CPD certificate. So I would like for us to start off with our first panel, which is that what is two-pot and what should members be discussing? What should funds be discussing to their members? So first, let's get the results, and then I will introduce our panel. So remember that the question was, how do you feel about the two-pot system? And we're seeing some results. They're looking fairly even. Are you for it or are you against it? We're seeing almost 50-50. So we can see the results there. We're now at 50-50. So, everyone is sitting on the fence at this point, but I guess the results we'll see is next year once it's implemented. So let's start off with our first topic of the day. We have a panel of speakers, which will be myself, Head of Legal, Lieb van Zyl, Gabeto Matai, a legal advisor, and Carla Skuman, a legal advisor as well. So let's introduce them.
Good morning. Thank you, Nicole.
Good morning.
There we go. So there are our slides. Welcome to all our delegates. We hope that this will be a fruitful discussion with you as our delegates. I just wanted to elaborate on the CPD certificates. There's a very logical reason why we are not issuing the CPD certificates. You will have noticed that we postponed this seminar. It was supposed to have taken place delay it because we're waiting for the final legislation, and that is the reason why we didn't send our slides to be accredited beforehand, because that unfortunately is our reality. We are still waiting for the final two-pot legislation. So I just wanted to mention to you that there is a potential seminar that depending on when the final legislation is received, we may have to convene another legal seminar before the end of December or early 2024, so that we can discuss any such changes with you on a fairly urgent basis. So the first topic, as Nicole alluded to, is member education regarding the two-pot retirement reforms. And we decided to try and make it interesting by having a panel of 4 people speaking, so that we not just conveying slides and information to you, but that you get a sense that this is ideally a conversation that needs to be had with all our members. I wish the poll question was about Saturday's game. So something humongous is going to happen on Saturday, 28th October at 9 o'clock, which is very late. No, none of us are very good at staying up that late. But the All Blacks and the Springboks will be playing against each other this Saturday evening. And the winner of that match will make history. They will become the first team ever to have won the World Cup 4 times. Now, there are countless uncertainties about the outcome of the game. As I'm sitting here, I'm very anxious. I'm not just a rugby supporter, I'm a rugby lover too. And I'm concerned about a number of contingencies. Will Bongi even be available for selection? You know that he's embroiled in a racial slur allegation at the moment. Are we going to start with Marty Libok, or are we going to play Andre Pollard? What game plan will suit the two respective fly-halves? Will we be playing expansively, or will we be playing conservatively like against England this past Saturday? Do we start with Oxenchair, who's been brilliant this past Saturday evening? Now, what I'm trying to illustrate to you here is that the outcome of that game is dependent upon a lot of uncertainties and contingencies, but we, at the end of it all, rely on our coaching staff, Jacques Nienaber and Rassie Erasmus, to come up with a winning strategy to put us in the best possible situation to win that game. Now, this is not very dissimilar to what we are going to talk to you about today. So, 1 March 2024, the implementation date of the two-pot retirement reforms is around the corner. There's 128 days left. And just like the Springboks, we are sitting with a whole bunch of uncertainties and contingencies that makes us anxious. But our job is to sift through all these uncertainties and come up with the best potential strategy to be able to implement the two-pot reforms when 1 March 2024 comes. So at NBC, I can tell you that we have been receiving a number of queries from members on the ground, also from trustees and clients, and it's based on the responses that we had to compile up to now that we decided to talk to you about one very important aspect, and that is, how do we communicate these changes to our members? So you will see that I highlighted in yellow there a disclaimer. As I alluded to previously, we are still waiting for the final legislation. So just to take you through a brief history, you've got a first draft in the middle of 2022. Then we got a revised draft on 9 June. And we were part of a workshop with National Treasury from 6 to 9 September. Nicole?
Hi, Liv. I just wanted to check on our side. I know that on your slides you had presented everything that you're discussing. Right now, we're still on the agenda. So if we could maybe have you check that out, and then
So I'm
back.
paging through the slide, Shweta. Can you see it? Let me unshare the document and just bring it up again.
Apologies to our delegates. Please give us a moment whilst we work on these technical difficulties. You know how it is.
Is that better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
All right. So sorry for that interruption, delegates. So as I said, we have been required to respond to a number of queries from trustees and members alike as to what the two-pot reforms will entail. It is subject to final legislation still. That doesn't change the fact that there's a real need to communicate to our members on a very urgent basis. Keep in mind that disclaimer that we are still waiting for the final draft of the legislation. So, where does member communication fit into any kind of project plan? And what I used as an example there is the NBC project plan that we are working on since we got the legislation in June, so that we as an organization is ready for 1 March. So that entails system changes. There's going to have to be process changes. We have to plan for additional resources and budgets. We have to be ready to make certain changes if necessary to investments. And Tata will speak to you later today about that pertinently. We have to go and amend our agreements that we have with our clients. And then you see there at number 6, I highlighted and bolded, and it's member education. I think this is a vital section of our duties that we have to comply with going forward. Then we also have to communicate to trustees, clients, be prepared for different types of complaints and queries, and we have to adjust our policies. But I wanted you to understand the relevance of member communication and education as a separate part of your plan to get ready for 1 March. This is what your framework should ideally look like. Now, obviously, this can differ from fund to fund, but we believe that you need to cover these 8 points at least. So firstly, you have to explain to the members what is the purpose of the 2-pot reforms. Secondly, you need to be able to explain to them what is contained in the 3, 4, 5 pots that Carla will speak to you about. You will need to be able to explain to them how seeding will work on 1 March 2024. You need to be able to explain to members how will they gain access to savings withdrawals once per annum. In the 5th place, you need to explain the impact of the 2-pot reforms on each of the exit events, because there will be differences for members going forward. Then in the 6th place, Nicole will speak to you about this, and that is that we believe that members who are 57 years old on 1 March 2024, they need to be communicated to a little differently because there is a bit more at stake for them. Then we will need to speak about the complexities of Section 37D deductions. Now, when Kia speaks about that, we will each time highlight to you what we think is too much information for the members, but that you as a trustee or a stakeholder probably would need to understand. And then in the last place, we need to talk to members about practical challenges that we anticipate may be experienced from 1 March 2024. So let's get going. The first point we said that we need to discuss with our members is the purpose of the 2 pots. Now, we sometimes forget that the 2-pot reforms actually has its roots in the COVID pandemic, which is now 3 years behind us. So what we started seeing is that a lot of members were starting to experience financial challenges. This is because some people lost their jobs, some people salary payments were suspended, and some people were put on short time or reduced shifts to mitigate the financial impact on South Africa. But we forget sometimes that it was a global crisis. And if we look to some international jurisdictions, we see that those countries were actually able to give their pension fund members early access to their retirement savings. Those are countries like Australia, Belgium, Canada. And with the benefit of hindsight being perfect 2020, we are now 3 years later able to assess the impact that those early access events in certain of these countries had. Just for those of you who are interested to read about it, the Chilean pension model has come under a lot of criticism because the early access that they allowed to their pension fund members led to very pertinent and very challenging outcomes. And I think if you listen to Subedra's presentation later today, you'll start to get an idea as to what those impacts may have been. All right. So South African workers, when they read about this, they said, but National Treasury, ideally, you should be doing something for us too. We also need pertinent financial relief. One of the things that the FSCA did was to issue a guidance that funds could reduce their contributions for a limited period of time. We also saw that the DA tabled a private bill in Parliament. The purpose of this bill was to expand on the circumstances where members can use pension-backed home loans in terms of Section 19 of the Pension Funds Act. Because it was rejected by Parliament, there's no purpose in unpacking what the merits of that proposal was, because Parliament did reject it. And simultaneously, we started seeing the proposals about the two-pot reforms. We got the first draft of the legislation in middle 2022. At that stage, the implementation date would have been 1 March this year, which was then postponed to 1 March next year. But this is what the purpose of the two-pot reforms are. It's a coin with two very different sides. The first side is you and your members will be given early access to your retirement savings to alleviate some of your financial challenges. The opposite side of that coin is that you will be forced to preserve a significant portion up to date of retirement. Now, by using that analogy of a coin, you already get the idea that it's the same coin. You can't have the one without the other. And Subedra will illuminate some of these practical challenges in his presentation. Then the second heading in your member communication project should be to explain to the members what is contained in each of the pots. So we keep on talking about the two-pot reforms, and that just reminds me, in the revised legislation, National Treasury changed the terminology to components. We've been talking about pots for so long, so we're going to stick to that. I think it is a nice way to understand it conceptually. So Carla has prepared a presentation to you as to what your explanation to members should entail when it comes to the calculation of the various pots. Please take us through your presentation, Carla.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Lip, for the introduction. So like Lip mentioned, I'm going to take us through the composition of the different pots. From 1 March 2024, all new contributions paid will be split in between two pots. 1/3 will go into your savings pot and 2/3 will be going into your retirement pot. So your 1/3 savings pot, this portion will be available in an emergency once a year. So you will be able to access funds in your savings pot once annually, and the minimum withdrawal you will be able to take is 2,000 Rand. But important to explain to your members that you will be borrowing from your future self if you access the savings pot. You have to remind them the money that they don't spend, you will have when you retire. So your retirement pot is going to keep on reducing the more you tap into your savings pot. So we need to kind of deter our members to do that. On to the next slide, please. So when we look at the second pot, that is your retirement pot, into which the 2/3 of your monthly contributions will be paid into. You will not be able to touch this money until retirement. When you retire, it should be used to buy an annuity, and that annuity will then in turn pay out a monthly income to you. From March 2024, draft legislation now allows for a maximum of 10%, capped up 25% to be used as seeding capital. So this amount will be taken from your vested pot, and your vested pot is all of your savings prior to March 2024. Then you will be able to ensure that come 1 March 2024 that there's at least a little something in your pot for you to take. So that will be capped at 10% or at a maximum of 25,000 Rand. The so-called seeding capital. But just previous slide, Lip, there's one example I want to touch on. But important also to explain to our members, not everybody will be able to have that 10%. So you will at least need to have 20,000 Rand in your vested component to be able to withdraw 2,000 Rand on the 1st of March 2024. So members who have less than that will not be in a position to take anything from their savings pot. On to the next one, thanks. So now the question arises, what about all of my retirement savings up until March or end of February 2024. What happens to the savings since I joined employment until next year, March? That part is in essence your third part. It will be called your vested part. And all the rules that was applicable on that part or the component remains applicable. It is slightly different when it comes to a provident fund members. Who were members of a provident fund on 1 March 2021, the so-called T-Day annualization. So that your vested part will then also be made out of two smaller pots or two components. That would be your vested rights, all of the savings you saved up until 1 March 2021, and then your non-vested proportion or component. That's the savings after 1 March 2021 until February 2024. So for provident fund members on retirement, you will be able to take your vested part lump sum amount, but you need to annuitize the non-vested portion. However, when you resign from your employer, you are still able to cash in the entire vested component. So it's only on retirement where you have to annuitize this part, the non-vested section, but upon resignation, you can still take the entire part. On to the next one. Thanks, Lee. So just as an overview, your first part will be the vested component, and it will have, in that part, you will have the vested and non-vested rights. Vested is everything prior to 1 March 2021, and non-vested is 1 March 2021 up until end of February 2024. Thank you, Lip. All right, I'm not going to delve into detail with regards to members who were over 55 on 1 March 2021. My learned colleague Nicole will take the delegates through that in more detail. So just as a broad overview, there you have your three parts, your vested component, everything prior 1 March 2024, your 1/3 savings component, which you will be able to tap into once annually, and then the untouchable retirement part. Thank you. On to the next one. Very important to explain to the members what do they need to know about their savings part. It is best to withdraw only in emergencies. If you do withdraw from a savings component, you have to pay an administration fee. So that will be around about between 400 and 500 Rand per transaction, as well as the tax that will be based on your marginal rate. So that marginal rate essentially means it's the rate on the salary bracket that you currently fall in. That will be the rate at which you will be taxed, which is problematic. So currently when you do make a lump sum withdrawal from your funds, there is different tax schedules handed down by SARS, which accordingly you will then be taxed. So there was suggestions made to SARS to perhaps introduce a flat rate or some sort of scale to work with. Because also the fund does not have this information. The fund does not know what your member's current marginal tax rate is. And it's also much higher if you compare it with the current tax scales that is in place or the schedules. Then thirdly, your savings pot is not intended to be a transactional account. It's very important that you ensure that you save enough money to live on in your retirement. If you do not tap into this and choose to transfer the savings money into your retirement pot, or if you keep it in your savings pot, this pot will be your lump sum at retirement. Thank you, Lee.
Okay, thank you, Carla. We encourage our delegates to post your questions in the comment section, please, and we'll try to address it at the end. But I do have a few questions for you, and Nicole, if we can bring you up to the screen. You also had a few questions, Nay. So my first question is that in your slides, you said, Carla, that access to retirement savings withdrawals once per annum can only be used in emergencies. Is that legislated that way?
It's not. So just to regulate into your savings part.
Yeah. Your savings withdrawals, you
Yes,
said
so
that
it's
membership.
not legislated. Members are able to withdraw once per annum, whatever they need the monies for. But if you look for an example, say you had a lot of expenses over the festive season that is coming up, for example. You went away on holiday, maybe you had some kids at school with re-registration fees, and you decide to tap into the money in January. Then an emergency comes up during October, November, or December. A real, maybe somebody needs to undergo an emergency medical procedure. Now you won't be able to tap into your savings because you already tapped into it during January, February, which was not really an emergency. It was just to go have fun, enjoy the festive season. So that is an example. So to answer, it's not legislated, but members need to be made aware of these kinds of scenarios.
Thank you, Carla.
Thanks, Carla.
Nicole?
I think on my side, I've had quite a few people asking the question. I know my brother had recently asked me, the seeding capital. No one really understands what does that mean. And his question to me was, well, if they're capping the seeding capital and they're capping the amount at 25,000 Rand rather, and I have a fund credit of maybe R1,000,000, then it really doesn't benefit me much, does it? How can I only be allowed to take out 25 Rand per year? So the question was, why is it, or is it that every year members will only be allowed to actually take out a maximum of 25,000 Rand?
Okay, so that 25,000 Rand maximum amount, it's not going to be an annual event. So you will not be able to transfer from your vested component into your savings component year after year. It's only going to be a once-off event to ensure or to enable members to, because there's going to be a lot of claims, or we anticipate a lot of members wanting to withdraw come 1 March 2024. So to assist them to have something in that pot, they will allow a once-off transfer, with the 25,000, 10%. But as per my previous example, members who would have less in their vested pot on 1 March 2024 might not be able to have that minimum 2,000 Rand. And also by means of example, I've touched on the fees that's going to be payable and your tax rate. So even if you do decide to withdraw the minimum of 2,000 Rand, if you then deduct the administration fee, let's say it's 500 Rand, you're sitting on 1,500 Rand. Minus your tax, say that is going to be according to your marginal rate, it could be another 500 Rand. And then we will only be withdrawing 1,000 Rand where you intend to take 2,000 Rand. So is it really worth it? You have to consider all of those factors.
Okay, thanks, Carla.
Yeah, Carla, I just wanted to conclude by making one remark. We have to advise you, delegates, that that 25,000 Rand cap is currently subject to final negotiation between National Treasury and organised labour. Organised labour, I just saw one report, is asking for at least 50,000 Rand. But what we need to keep in mind is that that cap will only apply next year. So 1 March 2025, whatever the balance in your savings component is, even if it's more than 25,000 Rand, that will be available to the members to withdraw. So the 25,000 cap applies once only. Thanks, Carla. I think we need to move on. So we're now at the third heading in our member communication plan. I'm going to ask Kia to take us through this particular section, and it deals with the impact of the two-pot retirement reforms on the various exit events and how it will impact on members' expectations in comparison to the current regime. Over to you, Kia.
Thank you, Leap, for the introduction. Again, welcome to NBC's legal webinar. As Leap has mentioned, I will be highlighting the key changes the reform has introduced when it comes to the exit events and Section 37D deductions. The first exit type I will discuss is resignation. Now, when a member exits the fund due to resigning, the member can take their full vested benefit in the vested part as a lump sum payment, taxed based on the lump sum tax tables. The balance in the savings part is not readily accessible because if that member made a withdrawal from the savings part within that year of assessment, the member cannot take the balance from the savings part. There is one exception to this, namely when the balance in the savings part is less than 2,000 Rand. That is to say, the member will be able to withdraw this amount despite having withdrawn from the savings part within that year. I would like to remind you all, as Carla has mentioned, that the withdrawals from the savings part are subject to the marginal tax rate. The retirement part is not accessible. It will remain with the fund until the member reaches retirement age, unless the de minimis threshold applies. So just a quick explanation of the de minimis rule. If the member's total retirement interest in the fund is less than 247,500 Rands at retirement, the member can take this whole retirement benefit in a lump sum. If it is 247,500 Rands or more, the 1/3 restriction will apply, which means that the member will have to buy an annuity. Next slide, please. Upon retrenchment, the member will have access to the vested part, and the same with regards to the savings part will apply. The vested part, however, will be subject to the current rules. That is to say, the member will be able to take everything up to 1 March 2021 as a cash lump sum. The amount after 1 March 2021 is subject to annuitization. The treatment of the retirement part is the same as when a member resigns. It's not accessible, and it will remain with the fund until a member reaches retirement age. The industry has raised concern about this, and it was noted by the National Treasury. So they will address this in the second phase of the draft. Next slide, please. So upon having reached retirement age, the member can add the savings part to the retirement part to purchase an annuity, or the member can withdraw the full amount in the savings part as cash, which would be taxed according to the retirement lump sum tables. Fortunately, as Carla has mentioned, the lump sum tables have a more favorable tax rate compared to the marginal tax rate that applies before retirement or before the member retires. The total amount in the retirement part must be used to purchase an annuity. The minimum amount that can be used to purchase an annuity is 165,000 Rand. Amounts less than 165,000 Rand in the retirement part can be withdrawn as a lump sum. So it's important for funds to highlight to members that the total amount in the retirement part that must be purchased, that must be used to purchase an annuity is calculated using the balance available in the vested part as well. Also, another point to stress is that before retirement, the member may still withdraw funds from the vested part. As mentioned before, this withdrawal will be taxed according to the retirement lump sum table if withdrawn as a cash lump sum. Next slide, please. With regards to the death of a member, the draft explanatory memorandum states that whatever is in the member's retirement pot upon death, it must be used by the beneficiaries to purchase an annuity. I mean, this creates the perception that trustees, when allocating the death benefit, may end up with a resolution where some beneficiaries are allocated benefits where they have to purchase annuities, whereas the other beneficiaries will be paid cash. However, based on the discussion that was had with the National Treasury As it stands, at death, the beneficiaries can choose to take the amount in the retirement pot as a cash lump sum, or transfer some amount to the retirement pot in order to purchase an annuity. And this will apply to all the 3 pots. Next slide, please. So from an advice point of view, again, it is imperative for funds to communicate options members have in a clear and concise manner, so as to allow members to make informed decisions with regards to their retirement savings and the elections afforded to them with the introduction of the reform. And this table illustrates the exit types and how the different pots will be treated.
Kia?
Yes?
Kia?
Yes.
I think now is the appropriate time. We have received a number of very interesting questions from our delegates, and I think this is just the appropriate time to maybe deal with them before we delve into the rest of your presentation. Shweta, if the delegates can't see these questions, will you please post them live? So the first one is, if one has taken a once-off withdrawal from a preservation fund, will this new pot system allow any further withdrawals? And my response to that is yes. So based on the definition of vested right in terms of the Pension Funds Act, you will be entitled to all your benefits that you were entitled to in terms of the rules of the fund that were in place immediately prior to 1 March 2024. We have a separate slide later on that deals with that. So your once-off withdrawal has no implication on you having access to a once per annum withdrawal. The second question, if you can put it up, please, Shweta. An admin fee of between 400 Rand and 500 Rand for the withdrawal seems excessive. Yeah, this is a difficult one.
All right, Leap, can I come in there?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have to state that it is still an industry discussion. It's not confirmed as final yet, and NBC will confirm as soon as a final decision has been made. So across industry, it's not a final amount. It's not set in stone as yet.
And it's also subject to negotiation with our clients there. But
Correct.
just to put it in perspective, paying a savings withdrawal claim involves bank verification, member detail verification, possibly doing a tax directive request for the marginal tax. That's one point that still needs to be clarified. And then issuing the payment. So there is a bunch of work that needs to be done. And it also alludes to the following question: who should be paying this cost? So in the first draft of the two-pot reforms, it was stated pertinently that the member making the withdrawal should be held liable for the costs. The revised draft dated 9 June is silent on that aspect, but I think logic dictates that other members should not be subsidizing members' access to retirement savings claims in the interim. But you're right, Carla, it is open to discussion and a negotiation, and we also expect a sort of a similar fee across all pension fund administrators in the country. Shweta, you can put up the next question, please. Will we be able to transfer funds from the savings to the retirement pot, assuming the retirement pot will have a better return on investment? Carla?
Sorry, can you just quickly repeat the question for me? Thanks.
Okay. Will we be able to transfer funds from the savings to the retirement pot, assuming the retirement pot will have a better return on investment? And also, there could be members that take your advice very seriously and are not desirous to make annual withdrawals. Will they be able to? Okay.
Yes, so members are more than welcome to transfer as many times from the savings pot to the retirement pot. So once or twice or thrice a year, you can transfer whatever is in your savings pot into your retirement pot, and they are correct in stating that it will have a better return on investment. Because remember, you are also earning compound interest on that lump sum amount that's being preserved in your retirement pot.
And similarly, members can also opt to transfer whatever is in the invested pot to the retirement pot. There is a piece of uncertainty as to what the tax implications of that will be. Currently, the legislation says if you do those transfers, you're going to have to apply for a tax directive. As industry, we said that makes no sense. It's not a tax event. The benefit doesn't accrue. We're simply moving money from the one pot to the next pot. And then the last question, please, Shweta. If one just doesn't withdraw from the savings pot until retirement, will he or she be charged this admin fee when they retire? No, at that stage, it will be a benefit payment, which is already catered for in the admin fee that your fund pays to the administrator every month. So there's no admin fee to be charged additionally. I think let's stop there. Kia, can we proceed with your presentation? I see that there are more questions that came in. We will deal with them throughout the course of this presentation. Are you done with the slide, Kia? Can I move on?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Lieb. Okay, so with regards to deductions under Section 37D, industry players have noted challenges which funds will face with the introduction of the reform. I will highlight some of these challenges. Under the deductions in Section 37D of the Pension Funds Act, for example, housing loans, divorce orders, and maintenance orders, will need some more greater attention as the Pension Funds Act will need to be amended to incorporate the reform. It appears that the deductions can only be made from the retirement part and the vested part and not the savings part. The draft legislation still needs refinement in this regard, but the process has started. As for instance, it was agreed during the National Treasury meeting held on the 6th until the 8th of September that the deductions will be proportionally made from each part. Next slide, please. In terms of housing loans, the reform will not affect pension-backed home loans that were granted prior to 1 March 2024. I'm going to take you through the key changes that we as NBC are of the opinion should be communicated to members. The first being that the draft bill proposes that funds may only grant home loans up to a maximum of 65% of the members' total interest in the fund. This is the aggregate of all of the members' parts in the fund, namely the vested, the savings, and retirement parts. Next slide, please. So even though the draft bill proposes that Section 37D deductions in respect of outstanding home loans be restricted to the affected members' vested parts and retirement part only, it was agreed during the National Treasury meeting that the deductions will be made proportional from each part. And lastly, it is important for members to note that the prevention of savings withdrawal is made subject to employer or guarantor approval. We find this a bit odd in that the employee in this regard would have left employment, meaning to say that the exit would have already taken place. Next slide, please. There's a new definition for pension interest that is included in the draft bill, which now state that this definition will override the current definition in Section 1 of the Divorce Act. The draft currently states that the pension interest may only be deducted from the vested part and retirement part, despite the savings part being included in the calculations of the pensionable interest. However, it was agreed upon during the National Treasury meeting that the portion of the pension interest awarded to the non-member spouse will be deducted from the savings part, vested part, and retirement part proportionately. The change in the pension interest calculation will apply to deferred pensioners as well, including deferred pensioners, paid-up members, paid-up benefits, pensioners, and pensions as well. So it is important to note that the member spouse may prohibit in some circumstances where divorce proceedings are pending from withdrawing from the savings part. Next slide, please. So it's not clear how the transfer of now for the challenges rather that we're facing. It's not clear how the transfer of portions should happen. However, industry players as well as NBC would prefer that it be transferred per part or be paid as a lump sum or combination, and that it should be based on the choice of the non-member spouse. The divorce courts will still be empowered to make orders as to the distribution of the pension interest as defined in the Divorce Act. But remember, the Pension Funds Act definition is different. So if the Divorce Act is not going to amend the draft bill to make it clear that the definition of the pension interest in the Pension Funds Act takes precedence over the meaning given to the pension interest in the Divorce Act, it will create some sort of complication. So this will greatly assist legal practitioners when it comes to either drafting or vetting of the divorce orders. It's also not clear, sorry, Leap, can you go to, thank you. It's also not clear what qualifies as pending divorce order. Therefore, this could potentially cause unnecessary delays by the non-member spouse by simply informing the fund of the pending divorce matter without actually providing supporting legal documents. Next slide, please. With regards to maintenance orders, so both arrear maintenance as well as future maintenance can now be deducted from pension benefits. There is a restriction that we feel we need to highlight to members, and that is that the savings withdrawal may be prohibited in circumstances where maintenance proceedings are pending. Next slide, please. Again, there are challenges here as well that we face. There is an administrative burden on funds to pay future maintenance. Funds should ideally pay future maintenance to maintenance court, which then in turn should only make the deductions from that lump sum as and when the maintenance payments are due by the member. Another aspect to consider is that a fund may refuse to allow a member to take savings withdrawals where the fund is aware that a maintenance order action is pending, and the retirement funds is not satisfied that if there is any withdrawal from the savings part, will there be enough left for the fund to be able to comply with the pending maintenance order? But then how will the funds be, can you, yes, thank you. So, but how will the funds be able to make that assumption as to how much is available? This remains to be answered, as well as how will the fund be made aware of any pending maintenance orders? Thank you, Leap. Next slide. With regards to employer claims for damages, if the employer has obtained a judgment, a member will require the employer's consent before the fund may go ahead and action their request to activate a payment from their savings pot. However, if the employer has not obtained a judgment, the fund must action the payment request unless there is a court order that grants for the withholding pending the final judgment. That concludes my discussion. Thank you, Lee. Over to you.
Thank you, Kia. Before we unpack some of those complexities, I want us to deal with a few of the questions that came in from our delegates in the meantime. Shweta, if you can put up the next question. How does these withdrawals affect tax on exit or withdrawal? And the simple answer is it doesn't. Okay, so even though it's a punitive taxation at the marginal rate when you make your savings withdrawals every year, it doesn't have an impact on an exit event, and you still pay tax based on the withdrawal tables. Then Kia, the next one I want you to deal with, because the question is, what happens in the event of divorce? Will the retirement balance be split and forced into a retirement fund, or will they be paid out?
What happens in the event of a divorce? Sorry, can you just pop up the question again? What happens in the event of a divorce? Will the retirement balance be split and forced into a retirement fund, or will they be paid out? They will be paid.
Kia,
yes.
I can paraphrase. I think the question says, will there be an element of preservation with regards to the non-member spouse?
So it is up to the non-member spouse to make that decision as to whether they want to annuitize the pensionable interest that was paid upon the divorce, or if they want to have it paid as a cash lump sum.
Okay, so no preservation.
No preservation.
Carla, the next one is for you. Are all members subjected to this reform, or is it optional?
All right, it is different for members that's now 57 years old, but for the balance of the industry, it is compulsory to partake in this new regime.
Okay, so you don't have a choice, colleagues.
Okay.
If you do not withdraw, the next question, Shweta, if you do not withdraw from the savings pot until retirement and you have more than 550,000 Rand, will that be taxed? So I want to answer that question based on the expectation that sanity will prevail. But that is one of the points that we need clarity from National Treasury. So they haven't made it clear in the legislation whether a cash withdrawal from the savings pot upon retirement is subject to the lump sum tables or whether it will be taxed at marginal rates. My expectation, and based on our engagement with Treasury, is that you will get that 550,000 Rand tax-free, but please make an asterisk next to that because we're waiting for that to be clarified in the final legislation. This one is for you, Kia. In the event of death, will my dependents get the payout or will 2/3 be locked in the fund?
They will receive all your pensionable interest. This is not restricted to the 2/3.
Lekker nee. So the wording is a bit confusing because it speaks about annuities in the wording, but Treasury has since then clarified that when it comes to death, the two-pot reforms do not aim to introduce any changes. So death benefits will be paid exactly like they are being paid currently. Now, just to conclude on your topic, and I see that the clock is running, but I do think that we need to unpack it. So when it comes to Section 37D deductions, Kian, you can comment on what I'm about to say. On both four that you discussed, the home loans, the pension interest on divorce, the maintenance orders, as well as employer damages claims, I am of the opinion that National Treasury went too far. So they introduced a lot of complexity that's actually part of our discussions with them on the COFI, on the COFI Act that is coming. We're expecting it at the end of the year, and we're saying that it should come out of the two-pot reforms because it's not part of the two-pot reforms. It's actually stuff that we wanted to address with the COFI bill. So we all know that, just as one example, for maintenance orders, the Maintenance Act does not allow for payment of future maintenance orders. Now, all of a sudden, with the two-pot reforms, future maintenance has been included. It simply doesn't make sense to us. It adds to the complexity, which impacts on our readiness come 1 March. And then just, on each of these 4 deductions, there are different parties that are required to have a say whether a member will be allowed to make his annual savings withdrawal. In the case of pension-backed home loans, the legislation says the employer must consent. That makes no sense, with all due respect. It only makes sense in cases where the fund grants direct home loans or where the employer grants a home loan. It doesn't deal with the eventuality of credit providers externally. Then with regards to divorce orders, before a member will be allowed to make a savings withdrawal, and if there's a pending divorce action, he or she must obtain the consent of their spouse. Now, if that member lies on his claim form and says there are no pending divorce proceedings and nothing has been served on the fund, he will be allowed to make his savings withdrawal. We just feel that consent requirement is too burdensome. On maintenance, similarly, but here it's different. Here it says that the fund has a discretion. So if the fund is aware that there are pending maintenance proceedings, it may refuse the member to have access to a savings withdrawal. We just feel that trustees already have more than enough fiduciary duties. The wording is too vague. What does pending maintenance proceedings mean? Sometimes it could be an investigation in the maintenance officer's office between the two parties. That is maintenance proceedings, but how would the fund know about that? And then lastly, with employer damages deductions, there's now an additional requirement that if the employer hasn't obtained a damages judgment yet, that the employer must apply for an interdict also, which is an additional requirement that incurs legal costs. Ultimately, why all these complexities are relevant for me is when we started planning for the two-pot reforms, we said we should ideally be able to allow the member to submit a claim online via the internet net. But here is why we can't do that. This is why we believe that we need the employer's cooperation during that process, simply based on the fact that for certain deductions, certain parties' consent needs to be obtained first. Right, so that's a complexity to park at the back of your head. Thanks, Gia.
Thank you, Leap.
Did you want to add anything?
No. Thank you.
All right, so now so let's get back to our project plan. We said we are busy drafting a communication strategy to our members, and the fourth heading deals with members who were older than 55 on 1 March 2021. We believe that they need to be approached a little differently, and Nicole will explain why we say that.
Thank you so much, Leap. So I just wanted to recap on what Carla had stated earlier before I really dive deep into this specific member. So remember that a vested component, as Carla stated, is where members' total fund credit as at the date of the 1st of March 2021. That's the vested component. So I want us to think of the word vested. Vested essentially means the portion of the fund credit that is excluded or left out of the new two-pot system. So it's basically protected away from the new two-pot system. And that is the specific component that we mean when we say the vested component. We mean that protected, kept outside of the new two-pot system regime. So keeping in mind that I will be discussing this specific component in detail and highlighting to you what are some of the most important points to communicate to these members. So in this component, a member will still retain all of their current rights to access to this component and the benefits which will also be transferred into it. So when we look at these rights, we see that the rights are firstly being able to withdraw the entire benefit from this component upon resignation, dismissal, or retrenchment from their employer. Secondly, members will be able to make one full or partial withdrawal from a benefit preserved in a preservation fund. And thirdly, on the date of retirement, this entire component can actually be withdrawn in cash. So what I want to discuss with you all today is the importance of this component and what it means for members who are 55 by the 1st of March 2021. And what is actually the most important to note, what's most important to note is that we need to communicate to these members that it's actually optional for members who were at the age of 55 on the 1st of March 2021. So as it stands, all members will currently be automatically included in the two-pot regime, and it will actually be this member's responsibility to opt out of the two-pot system. And this is why it's actually critical for these members to understand what each option will mean for them. So these vested rights relate only to the vested component, and the rules that apply to this component under the current regime will actually continue to apply after the implementation of the two-pot regime. So before I get into this slide, I just want to make that reminder that once the regime comes into effect, members will no longer be able to make contributions to their vested component, that protected component, that one that we're leaving out of the two-pot regime, right? So if they opt in, they will no longer be able to make contributions to that vested component. However, this will not apply to members of a provident fund who were 55 at the date of the 1st of March 2021. So now what we're looking at here is what would be the consequences and what would be the outcomes of this member who is 55 at 1st of March 2021, who remains in the two-pots system and does not inform the fund of their option to be excluded from it. So firstly, should these members wish to participate in the new regime, they will no longer be able to continue contributing to their vested component, as I mentioned earlier. This essentially means that their contributions will now be split between the savings component as well as the new retirement component. Now, the amounts contained in the vested component will be subject to the current retirement regime. And as I mentioned earlier, and was mentioned earlier as well in our discussions, is that the ability to make those once-off withdrawals from preservation funds, the ability to access pension and provident funds upon resignation, retrenchment, or withdrawal, and continued protection of these vested rights, those rights will remain only within this vested pot, right? So at retirement, this member who's opted in can take up to 1/3 of their vested pot in cash, whilst at least 2/3 must be used to buy an annuity. And lastly, in the cases of members who immigrate from South Africa and they actually stop being a tax resident, they will be able to access their vested component as a cash lump sum. So the payment of this lump sum is also subject to that 3-year rule under the current regime, which applies to members of a retirement annuity fund, pension preservation fund, and also a provident pension preservation fund. So next, we'll be looking at the consequences of a member who informs their fund that they actually wish to opt out. So this is a member who now has been informed about what the two-parts regime is all about, has the necessary knowledge in order to make the decision and go and actually actively go and tell the fund that I actually don't want to be put in the default position of being opted in. I am opting out of the two-parts regime. So these members will have the ability to firstly continue making contributions to their vested component until they either retire from or leave the fund that they were a member of on the 1st of March 2021. So now, secondly, we look at, should that member choose to keep contributing to this vested component, their full contribution will be allocated to only one component, and that will be the vested component. Now, should that those continued contributions go in their vested component, it means that they will now not be able to now contribute to the savings component and the retirement component. So remember, when you're opting out of the two-parts regime, that vested component, we said it's protected, it's left out, it's excluded from the two-parts regime. So once you opt out of the two-parts regime, you no longer are having a savings component or a retirement component. You only have a vested component, and the current rules will apply moving forward for this member. So this means that the vested component for this member will be paid as a cash lump sum, or it can be annuitized depending on the vested and non-vested benefits before and after the 1st of March 2021, respectively. So quickly, I want us to just look at some of the practical examples. I just have 2 cases here. We have John, who has opted in to remain into the two-parts regime. He is well-versed, he understands what it means, and Patricia, who's also been given the same amount of knowledge and guidance regarding this two-part system, and she's decided she does not want to be a part of the system. So we're going to look at a table and look at the side-by-side. So now if John remains in the regime and Patricia remains out of the regime, we see that in the first line, John was 55 in March 2021, whilst Patricia was 62. John was set to retire in October next year, so that's 2024, whilst Patricia is set to retire as well in October in 2024. Now we see that both of them at March 2021 had a fund credit of 550,000 Rand. So this amount will be vested for both parties. It would go into the vested component, whether you remain in or out. So now let's look at the differences of remaining in or out. So in John's case, his fund credit to date, as at October 2023, is 750,000. And that's the same case for Patricia as well on the right-hand side. So when we now we go into the differences of what would happen if you opt in or out for these members who had turned 55 by March 2021. Firstly, John now, because he remains in the regime, he will no longer be able to contribute to his vested component. So that thousand rand will be ring fenced, it will be protected, and it will fall outside of the two parts regime essentially, and the old rules will apply, or the current rules will apply to that vested component. Whilst Patricia, on the other hand, will not have access to a savings component or a retirement component. So when she gets her benefit statement, she'll only see one component. That will be the vested component as it stands. Whilst John, on the other hand, he will have a vested component on his benefit statement, he will have a savings component, and he will also have a retirement component. So now when we move down, we see that both John and Patricia are currently contributing the same amount to their funds. So John will continue now to contribute 5,000 Rand, and Patricia will also continue to contribute that 5,000 Rand. That includes the employer and employee contributions. However, when we look at Patricia on the left, she will only now be contributing that 5,000 Rand to that one component, being the vested component alone. And then when we look at John on the left-hand side, he will now have his 5,000 Rand split between the savings component as well as his retirement component. So none of his contributions will fall within that vested component. Remember, now he's no longer able to contribute to that component. So essentially for John, he would be contributing 5,000 Rand per month once the regime is implemented, and it would be split 1/3 of his savings component, which gives you that 1,666 Rand with 66 cents. And then his retirement component, he'd be receiving that 3,333 Rand and 33 cents. That's what he would be contributing until the date of his retirement. However, when we look at Patricia, component in October 2024, upon her retirement, her total fund credit will be accessible to her, including the growth of that retirement. So now let's look at the outcomes and let's look at the conclusion of this. Let's look at what John's options would be. So remember that John has decided he did not go to his fund and say, I don't want to be a part of this two-part system. So here's what his options would be. Firstly, John will maybe able to access what will be in his savings component from the 1st of March. He'll have that ability to withdraw on a 12-month period from his savings component. Secondly, he may access his entire vested component fund credit should he resign, be dismissed, or be retrenched before the date of his actual retirement. Third, his retirement component now will only be accessible to him on the date of his retirement. That's why it's called the retirement component. So with this component, he will be limited to accessing only 1/3 of this component as a lump sum amount, whilst the balance is to be used to purchase an annuity. So that would be the case in the two-parts regime. However, in certain instances, like in John's contributions from the 1st of March, should the implementation happen from the 1st of March next year, 2024, will amount to less than 247,000 Rand and 500. So because it's below the de minimis, which is the threshold, John actually will now have the option to take the remainder of his contributions and take it as a lump sum as well. However, had John exceeded this amount, then the two-parts regime would apply and he would have to buy an annuity and only be allowed to take a portion of his lump sum. Now with Patricia, who has opted out of the two parts, we see that her results are quite simple. She either may, one, take her entire accumulated fund credit. Because it's only a vested component, she may take that entire component. Or secondly, she may opt at retirement that actually she wants to purchase an annuity and only take a portion of her entire vested fund credit as a lump sum amount. So those are the various differences. So just in conclusion, what we can see is that it's quite important to reach these members. And the importance of it is actually unimaginable. We need to be able to communicate to these members quite thoroughly. And this is why NBC will continue to provide to all of our stakeholders and our clients the guidance that is needed and the support. We want to support our stakeholders, our trustees, and ensure that you are able to actually communicate to your members and put them in a position of power by providing them with the necessary knowledge to allow them to actually make informed decisions. And that will conclude my discussion with you all today. Back to you, Lieb.
Thank you, Nicole. I like the fact that you use practical examples, and we have to be realistic. So, people who are 57 on 1 March next year, the likelihood of them accumulating more than 247,500 in their retirement pots within 3 years is perhaps a low probability. With the exception of maybe a member in receipt of a lump sum disability benefit, which will push them over the 247,500. Regardless, these are discussions that we need to have with this particular part of our memberships. We have received a few questions on the chat function, which we will deal with now. I'll deal with the first one. So this person wrote, I'm not sure how many resignations NBC processes each year, but I would imagine there will be thousands of small paid-up retirement pots at the end of each year. Will it continue to attract ongoing admin fees and FSCA levies? Is there a minimum paid-up value, as some may be eaten up by fees? Yeah, this is actually a very stark reality. As Kia explained in her presentation, that if a member has taken a savings withdrawal during any year, that member cannot take the balance of the savings pot when he or she leaves, unless it's less than 2,000 Rand. So there's part of the answer. There is a minimum amount, and that is 2,000 Rand. But there's a bigger problem. Members who resign and are forced to now leave their retirement components behind, especially over the first, I would say, 10 years, those 2/3 pots will be relatively small, but they will be required by legislation to leave it behind in the fund. My suggestion would be, if that person has left and joined a new employer, transfer that retirement pot to your new employer's fund so that you get the benefit of compound growth. So here, Carla, I'm a bit moedswillig. I'm going to give you this one. What are the benefits of the two-pot system?
I would say, first and foremost, preservation, Lieb. To ensure that, or to kind of force the member to ensure that they do have sufficient funds to be able to retire comfortably. And second, the second benefit would be when you find yourself in a financially destitute situation, like we saw during the COVID pandemic, or if you unexpectedly lose your job, you will be able to have access to some sort of emergency savings account. So it's twofold. Firstly, to assist with the preservation so that you can retire comfortably, and also to have some financial assistance when you really do need it, should an emergency arise.
Now, Nicole, the next question we'll unpack in elements, but it says if one leaves this process, and I'm guessing the person meant the two-pot regime, to take place without transferring any funds or withdrawing, will there now only be compound interest on 1/3 of their total contribution? Now, okay, Nicole?
No, you can go ahead first, Lieb.
I think what this delegate meant is, if a member decides never to make a savings withdrawal during any year, how do you make sure that you earn growth on the combined total of your retirement savings? In other words, the 1/3 plus the 2/3.
Yeah. So, Lieb, I think with this one, remember that whilst there will be some returns that you will receive from the savings component, you have to remember that there will also be fees that will be deducted. So it is quite wise to just remain and continue to increase that savings component and only take it out when necessary. However, obviously the returns wouldn't be as great as they would be if it was in the retirement component or in the vested component. So if you were to keep that savings component and not continue adding to it, let's say if you left your job or you resigned or you were retrenched, I think earlier Libet said if you actually find a new employer, what would be best is to actually transfer to a new fund so that you can continue to receive that growth rather than leaving it dormant.
Alternatively, Lip, if I can add on to Nicole,
Yeah,
transfer your savings pot into your retirement pot. So whatever is there,
absolutely.
just transfer it to ensure that you get that compound interest.
Absolutely. So the next question is two-pot disadvantages. I think it's a bit too early, and I suggest that you listen very, very closely to Subedra's presentation because it highlights the risks. And then also go and read up. I refer to the Chilean pension model. I can tell you that the outcomes there have been challenging. So I do think there are disadvantages, but this is something we need to view over a long term. The next question is, will benefit statements clearly indicate amounts in the different pots? So currently in the legislation, there's no requirement to provide benefit statements to members prior to 1 March 2024, but funds need to be able to give some form of guidance. So what we at NBC are planning is to build a calculator that we will, well, we're still undecided as to how we'll make it available, but it will probably be online, where a member can get an indication as to what amount will be available 1 March. The next question is for everybody. Would it not be preferable for Treasury to consider that members over age 55 should be opted out by default unless they opt in, given the time it may take for members to receive communication? Kia, do you want to deal with that one?
I definitely agree with the fact that we don't have enough time. I mean, it is proposed that the final legislation might be finalized within the next few days or so, which then would mean that we have roughly 3 months to educate these members on the choices that they need to make. And essentially, if that's the case, then it's going to bring in a lot of pressure on members to make the right decision.
But we can add that Treasury was open to our proposal that it be changed out the other way around. So we are expecting when the final legislation comes for sanity to prevail, in other words, for members older than 55 or people who are 57 currently, to expressly opt in. So I think there's some good news that we can fairly reliably expect to see when the final laws come. This is for you, Nicole. In the example of John and Patricia, would the admin fee applicable to each one's membership be different? In other words, if the one participates in the 2 pots and the other one doesn't?
So just a reminder that that admin fee that was discussed earlier by Carla is an approximate. So the industry is still working on the final numbers, just as we don't have the final draft legislation. So remember that in the savings component, the admin fees there would be different, whereas if you opt out and you don't have a savings component, the admin fees would be different as well. We also look at the tax implications would be different as well if you are part of the 2 pots regime versus if you opt out of the 2 pots regime, then that vested pot will remain with the current tax tables. So in terms of the admin fees, they're going to be different. But right now, I can't say for sure if I have the specific numbers. I don't know, Lieb, if you have any suggestions on what this could look like.
Look, just on a point of departure, both are still members of the retirement fund, and it should make no difference as to whether they're in the 2-pot regime or not. They'll be subject to the same admin fees. It's only upon making a savings withdrawal every year that there will be an additional fee, and the person making that withdrawal will be paying those costs. So I also got an indication from Shweta that we need to wrap up. Shweta, please bear with me. I do think it's important that we deal with these last final questions, and that I don't deal in detail with the remaining slides. So the question is, in 2025, will members be able to withdraw the entire saving in the savings pot? And I'm going to add to that question, even if it's more than 25,000 Rand. Carla?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Previously, people were able to withdraw their full benefit if it was under a certain amount, under 300,000, thereabout. Will that ability still remain? Um, so that is a question that needs to be unpacked a little bit more, and it's not necessarily a two-part question, but I think it hints at your de minimis discussion in your presentation, Kia. So if any portion of savings, regardless of whether it's the T-day non-vested or the two pots retirement pot, if any of those pots are below 247,500, that applicable member can withdraw that full amount in cash. So that is the questions for now, which means I need to now quickly deal. Shweta, and you can maybe take the other three ladies off, because this is where I start sounding like a grumpy old man. And I'll deal with that burden alone. But I'm not going to discuss it in detail, because remember our topic for today. Shweta, can you see my slides? Thank you. So that we have done. We think that the stuff that we discussed with you up to now, those are the things that you need to include in your member communication plan. Now you need to switch off. You're not going to communicate the following stuff to your members, because I do think it's too much complexity, and it will make them dear. So in other words, if I can go back to the Rassi, Erasmus and Job Nienaber scenario, we are not going to go for a 4+4 bench split. No, we won't be picking 4 backline players. It's too much complexity. All right. Similarly, the following 10 slides is just a high-level overview of what we think will add to our burden come 1 March. Now, the first of all is just like, that world record and a World Cup being at stake this weekend. We must always remember what is at stake here, and that is social security. All right, a person's membership of a retirement fund speaks to his or her ability to have access to social security. So we dare not take it lightly. We dare not stop fighting that the right legislation changes be implemented. We are worried about 1 March being so close and us still not having received the final legislation. But what I can tell you unequivocally is that NBC, as a pension fund administrator, will be ready to implement the two-pot system on 1 March, subject to 2 very important contingent events. The first being the SARS systems being ready to deal with what we expect to be bulk savings withdrawal claims. For those of you who work in payroll offices or HR, I think it would be reasonable of you to expect multitudes of members in front of your offices, even as early as 1 March. Now, those claims have to be processed by SARS. We need to get an indication as to what tax must be deducted. And then secondly, there is a requirement in the current legislation that all the fund's rules must be registered by 1 March 2024, all right? There are currently 1,700 active funds in South Africa. Now, I'm not saying, or this is not a reflection on the FSCA's capacity, but it will be a daunting task to register the rule amendments of 1,700 funds before 1 March 2024. Now, here's the practical difficulty. How do you explain to your member that he or she cannot get a savings withdrawal because their funds rules have not been registered? Now, as a mitigating factor, we have spoken to the FSCA, and we're looking at possibly coming together with them so that we put together a template rule amendment that will apply to all funds, but that still needs to happen. This slide only says that the current legislation refers to the possibility of the FSCA issuing conduct standards on a few of the problematic areas. Yeah, I'm thinking specifically about the home loan issue, the divorce order split, the payment of maintenance orders, and then also employer damages claims. I think it would have gone a long way if we had conduct standards to make sure that we don't have different funds interpreting the legislation differently. But the FSCA has confirmed to us that they're not busy working on any conduct standards, and we think that's a weakness with all due respect. I'm not going to speak about the grandfathering in too much detail, except to maybe refer to this factual example to explain to you how complex things can get from 1 March next year. So let's look at Mr. Sithole. He's a member of a Provident Fund. He was 45 on 1 March 2024. He has 3 million Rand in his vested component, and he qualified for the maximum 25,000 Rand seeding capital into his savings component. He applied for a housing loan prior to 1 March 2024, which is then only granted on 1 April 2024. But then his life takes a turn for the worst, and his wife institutes divorce proceedings on 1 June 2024. And to make matters worse, he's also then dismissed due to dishonesty, and the employer indicated that he is going to institute a damages claim against Mr. Sithole. So let's just think about some of the practical implications that we discussed today. So first of all, for Mr. Sithole to be able to make a savings withdrawal on 1 March next year, he's going to have to get the employer's consent in terms of the current legislation, which we said is a requirement that doesn't make sense. We would rather like to see the credit provider consent. As far as the pending divorce proceedings, if we as a fund didn't know about it because it was only instituted on 1 June 2024, we are going to give Mr. Sithole access to his savings withdrawal there because the fund didn't know about the pending divorce proceedings. Now, this raises a risk because Mr. Sithole can, in 5 years' time, come forward and say, guys, by virtue of you giving him access to his savings withdrawal, I got less out of the divorce. I don't think that these are unreasonable examples that we're using, and we need to be prepared to deal with that going forward. And then lastly, with regards to the pending damages claim, the current legislation says Mr. Sithole will not get a withdrawal claim if we don't get the employer's consent first. If the employer instituted proceedings but still hasn't obtained judgment for the damages, the employer need to be advised now to go and apply for an interdict to stop the payment to Mr. Sithole. We will share these slides with you afterwards, so please go through them in your own time. The second last point that I want to discuss is that we are advocating that certain types of funds be excluded from the two-pot regime in entirety, and those are beneficiary funds, unclaimed benefit funds, funds with pensioners only, dormant funds, funds who have applied for liquidation or where liquidator has already been appointed. And the sole reason why we say it should be excluded is the nature of these funds are vastly different. I think you can also add as a subcategory in brackets the issue of pensioners and paid up members. We'll maybe have to discuss it pertinently at a separate occasion in future. We just feel that a person in an unclaimed benefit fund, to put it bluntly, should not be allowed to have a savings withdrawal, because guess what? If that person comes forward to claim his savings withdrawal, you have found him, and it's no longer an unclaimed benefit. The last issue that we're worried about is transfer. So we spoke about it. Members will have the right to do transfers from their savings components to their retirement components. They can also transfer from their vested components to their retirement components. Currently, it looks like the legislation regards this as a tax event. So in other words, you would have to apply for a tax directive. We have proposed that it makes no sense and it's unnecessary complexity. Some ancillary considerations before I wrap up. We had a few questions from the delegates about costs. So it's not going to go away. We also need to find answers as to what's going to happen to additional voluntary contributions. Will members be required to split it into 1/3, 2/3 going forwards? DB funds currently, there's a big question mark about how it will be dealt with. So the GEPF, to put it in perspective, is the biggest pension fund in Africa. They have 1.3 million members, but they're a defined benefit fund. So the legislation that we got up to now, is amendments to the Income Tax Act and then also amendments to the Pension Funds Act. But the GEPF and the Transnet funds and the Post Office Retirement Fund, just to name a few, are not subject to the Pension Funds Act. So, there's another level of complexity. Then Tato's going to talk to you about investments later. So here's what I'm going to conclude with. Rassie en Jacques nie nader. will devise a strategy before Saturday to get us as close as possible to winning the Rugby World Cup for a record fourth time. Despite all the uncertainty, despite all the challenges, despite all the contingencies. Similarly, we will be ready to implement the two-pot system as best as possible on 1 March 2024. I'm not saying that we need to disregard the contingencies and uncertainties. Fact is, those are the cards we have been dealt with, and we need to find a way to deal with it as best as possible. I just think, and this is the objective of our presentation, if you communicate to members clearly, simply, as we suggested today, we would have taken a massive stride forward to be ready for 1 March 2024. Members need to understand, for instance, if there are 1 million savings withdrawal claims across the country being submitted on 1 March next year, that the expectations to receive payment within, let's say, 14 days may not be practically feasible, and that the expectations need to be managed accordingly. Lastly, if you want NBC to help you with your communication to your members, I've included Tato's email address there. Please contact him, and that's it for us. I know we've eaten up a lot more time that was allocated to us, but you will find Subedra and Tato's presentations very interesting. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Leap, for that discussion. Thank you to Carla as well, and thank you to Betwe. We got a lot of questions that are still coming up, and we want you to keep sending them in. Moving forward, we'll just take the Q&As towards the end of our sessions for the next two presenters as well, and we'll cover all of your questions. Keep sending them through, and we'll get back to them. Now, for our next speaker, I'm very excited to hear his presentation. This is Mr. Subedra Reddy. He's the Executive Head of Actuarial at NBC. He had recently presented at the IRFA conference, and he received an astounding ovation for his presentation. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend, so I'm quite excited to listen to what he has to say, and I hope that everyone else is also going to be engaged. He's going to provide us with a lot of practical examples and information, and he's really going to break it down to all of us in a manner that I think we're all going to be able to understand. So, Subedra, thank you so much. On to you.
Personal financial advice. The main purpose of the NBC Personal Financial Planning Division is to assist our clients in achieving financial independence at retirement. An NBC Personal Financial Advisor will utilize his expertise to best advise the client with investment option vehicles available at retrenchment, retirement, and life-changing events such as death and disability. Our personal financial plan is there to manage your finances so you can achieve your short-term and long-term financial goals. With the NBC Personal Financial Plan, you will know where you stand financially and what to expect. For more information, please see our website www.nbc.co.za or contact us on info@nbc.co.za.
Thanks very much, Nicole. So what I will be presenting about is regarding the two-pot system, is the impact that the two-pot system will have on your actual benefit. So you'll know that over the last few years, there've been lots and lots of changes to the retirement industry. So we talk about vested and non-vested, etc., compulsory annuitization. So this is another one of those changes that's come around. I think the question will be, why have we had so many changes, and why have we had this recent two-pot system coming in as well? So I think the main reason is because that retirement benefits are really not enough in the South African context. So retirement benefits, members are retiring with amounts that are too low. So how does the two-pot system seek to address this? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what benefit levels are now before the two-pot system, and once we bring in the two-pot system, how will those benefits change? So will you be better off or worse off? And if you're going to be better off or worse off, then by how much? Next, this is just a brief outline of what we're going to cover today. But I think importantly, if you look at the current outcomes in South Africa, so at the moment, the average benefit members are getting is around 30% of their salary. Realistically, you probably need anything between 60 to 100% of your salary if you want to retire comfortably. So what that means is, for example, if you're earning 10,000 Rand a month and then you retire, you need a pension of at least 6 to 10,000 Rand if you want to retire comfortably. Whereas the pension levels are sitting at around 3,000 Rand, which is definitely not enough. The next table looks at various funds, just as examples, to see practically what our members are retiring with. And you can see in that extreme right-hand column, members are retiring with very low benefits. The average replacement ratio, is around 29% across these 10 funds here. And you can see that, as I said, you need between 60 to 100% to retire comfortably. Looking at these funds, I can tell you that all of these funds are managed well. They've got good board of trustees. They keep their expenses low. They get good investment returns. So what is the reason for these benefits being so low? This just looks at the various factors that will affect your benefit in a fund. So the amount of service you have in your fund is very important. So the more service you have in your fund, the higher your benefit's going to be. Your investment return is extremely important. So the higher the investment return, the better your benefit will be. Certainly, contributions are very important. The more you're contributing, the better. And preservation. So preservation is something that's important, but not something we talk about very often. So what is preservation? Preservation means that when you leave the fund before retirement age or before age 55, if you are preserving, it means you're not taking your money in cash. So the current rules in the industry mean that for any fund, if you leave the fund before age 55, you can access your benefits. So you can take your entire benefit in cash. So what happens in our industry is that most members actually do that. If they leave a fund, for example, if they resign, if they're retrenched, if they get dismissed, and they're below the age of 55, they take their entire benefit in cash. And what they do is they end up spending that. So eventually, when they rejoin a fund, they rejoin with the benefit of zero, and they have to start from scratch. And that results in very, very low benefits. So whether you are preserving or not preserving makes a big difference in terms of your final benefit. So looking at all of these factors, I would say the main reasons why retirement benefits are so low, and certainly at around a 30% level, is that service is certainly not enough in those funds. So it's low levels of service and the fact that members are not preserving. What I'll do is we're going to do some projections, and you'll see in terms of numbers exactly what that impact is going to be. All right, so then on to the actual two-pot system. So what does the two-pot system do that will actually impact our benefits? So the two things the two-pot system brings in that will really impact your benefits when you retire from your fund is withdrawals and preservation. So withdrawals we've been talking about a lot. That's the access. So that talks about the savings pot. So your 1/3 of contributions that goes into the savings pot, and you can take out a portion. So that's withdrawals. So I think if you think about it logically, because you're taking out money from the fund, you're not going to have that money when you retire. So logically speaking, the fact that you can withdraw from your fund while you're still working and before you leave the fund, which is the access to that savings pot, you will have less when you reach retirement age. So what we'll do is, again, with those projections, we'll see how much less you'll have. And the second part is preservation. So preservation is not something that has been spoken about a lot, but it's a really very important part of the two-pot system. So I think possibly because of the name two-pot system, we ignore the preservation part. But preservation is just as important as the access. And in fact, it can possibly even have a bigger impact than the access. So you've got these two forces, withdrawals that will reduce your benefit, and preservation, which should increase your benefit. So again, we're going to look at those two forces individually in terms of how much will they affect your benefit, and then we'll put them together and see, what are those final outcomes going to be when you finally retire from your fund. All right, so first off, we're going to talk about withdrawals. So withdrawals, we know why government has said, members need to be able to access money from their funds. So in the South African context, savings levels are extremely low. So we have a very low level of savings. So because of that, what happens is when members reach an emergency, so where, for example, there's a need for medical care, so you have a heart attack, or you're in a car accident, or you have a need for housing. So, for example, there's a flood and your house gets damaged. If you need to pay university or school fees for your children, or any other life emergency, because most South Africans don't have savings set aside, they end up taking debt. And when you take out debt, it really puts you in a very terrible financial position. It can trap you, and debt can be extremely crippling. So the idea behind the two-pot system is it provides savings for emergencies. So if you have one of these emergencies, you can access what's in your savings pot and you don't need to take out any debt. So what impact will this access have? So this is just some aspects of the legislation I'm not going to go through because I think Lib and the crew have covered it really, really well. But how we're going to look at this is we're going to do some projection. So let's take a member. So this member, Sipho Gumede, he's currently aged 20. He's starting from a fund credit of 0, and we're going to project that he will retire at age 60. So at the moment, he's got a salary of 20,000 Rand a month. So he's working, he's got a salary of 20,000 Rand a month, and he contributes 12% of that to his fund. Now, let's look at what his benefits are going to be without the two-pot system. So this is without the two-pot system or before the two-pot system. If he then, according to that, he contributes at 12% of his salary every month. He gets a good investment return. He stays in the fund all the way till normal retirement age. He'll get a 85% replacement ratio or a 17,000 Rand a month pension. So put yourself in his shoes. So you're earning 20,000 Rand a month. You retire, you get a pension of 17,000 Rand a month. That's not too bad. I think that you can retire quite comfortably on that pension of 17,000 Rand a month if you are earning 20,000 Rand a month. Now, this is before the two-pot system, right? So let's now bring in the two-pot system. So the two-pot system is now there. So Sipho, at the end of his first year of working, he's got money in his savings pot. So he's got 10,000 Rand in his savings pot. And Sipho now faces a decision and a choice. Should I take money out of my savings pot? If I do, how much should I take out? So Sipho can take out anything from 0 all the way up to the 10,000 Rand maximum he's got in that savings pot. So let's just say Sipho takes out the maximum. He takes out everything. He takes out the full 10,000 Rand from his savings pot. And in addition, every year that he's faced with that choice, he decides, I'm going to take out everything and I won't leave out anything in my savings pot. How will that impact his benefit? Well, the answer is it impacts his benefit quite significantly. So his pension, remember, would have been 17,000 Rand a month. It now drops to 11,300 Rand a month. So that's a very, very big drop. So again, if you put yourself in his shoes, if we're saying you can retire comfortably on 17,000 Rand a month, to retire on 11,300 Rand a month, that's going to be quite difficult. So if I was earning 20,000 Rand a month, this is, almost half of what I was earning before. So it's actually going to be very difficult for me to retire. So what does this tell me? Under the two-pot system, if I take out everything from my savings pot, I'm almost going to guarantee that I will retire with insufficient funds. Or when I retire, I will not have enough money to retire. So does that mean I can't take out anything from my savings pot? No, it doesn't. So we're talking about here, Sipho was taking out everything from his savings pot. Now, let's just say he doesn't take out everything. So again, remember, he's got a choice. In the first year, he's got 10,000 Rand in his savings pot. He took out the full 10,000 Rand. Let's say that instead of taking out the full 10,000 Rand, he takes out 5,000 Rand or half. And then again, every year he decides, I'm only going to take out half of what's in my savings pot, not the full amount. So how will that impact his benefit? So here, remember, originally he had a pension of 17,000 Rand a month. If you took out everything, his pension was 11,300 Rand a month. If he only takes out half of what's in his savings pot, he'll have a pension of about 14,200 Rand a month. So you can see this is a lot better than if you took out everything from his savings pot. It's not quite the 17,000 Rand a month, so he is going to have less than 17,000 Rand a month, but it's possible that he can retire on this 14,200 Rand a month. So what does it tell me? It tells me you can access the savings pot, so you can use what's in the savings pot and still have enough to retire, provided, very importantly, that you don't take out too much from your savings pot. So that's the key. That's what's crucial. If you take out too much from your savings pot, you'll guarantee you will retire with not enough. But if you take out a reasonable amount, less than half, then you can retire and still have enough, of a pension to retire comfortably. The next graph just shows, again, how the withdrawals from your savings pot will impact pension. So remember we said if you take out nothing, that's the extreme left-hand side, you'll have a pension of 17,000 Rand a month. If you take out everything from your savings pot, the pension drops to 11,000 Rand. But if you take out less than half, then your pension will be about 14,000 Rand. So I'll say that's the sweet spot in these projections. If you're taking out less than half of what's in your savings pot, you should still be able to have enough to retire comfortably. All right, so that then was the impact of withdrawals on your retirement savings. Remember the two factors we said, number one was withdrawals, number two was preservation, right? So let's look at the impact then of preservation. So in this table, we're showing what happens when you don't preserve. So remember, not preserving means you leave the fund, and when you leave the fund, you take everything in cash, you spend it, you start again with zero. So here, if you're unemployed for 0 years, this is the same scenario as before. You got the 17,000 Rand a month pension. On the second row, a member is unemployed for 4 years, right? So he's unemployed for 4 years. When he's unemployed, he leaves the fund, takes out everything, spends everything. When he rejoins the fund, he starts off with zero. But just because of being unemployed for 4 years, so remember, he worked for 36 years and he's unemployed for 4 years, his pension has dropped from 17,000 Rand a month to 2,400 Rand a month. So that is a massive, massive drop. So this is the level of the state grant, the old age grant, right? So it shows that by not preserving, it destroys your pension. In South Africa, members are unemployed for an average of about 10 years. So the 10-year scenario is your average scenario. So it shows that you're unemployed for 10 years, you're working for 30 years, and you only end up with a pension of less than 2,000 Rand a month. And that's because of not preserving. What will happen if you preserve? So the next table shows the impact of preserving, right? So in this scenario, for example, let's look at the person who's unemployed for 4 years. So you're unemployed for 4 years, but you leave your money in your retirement pot in the fund. So you can still access your savings pot, but the 2/3, which was in your retirement pot, stays in the fund. You can't access that. And that continues to grow in the fund with interest. And then when you rejoin your fund, you have that money that's still in your retirement pot. So here, with 4 years of unemployment, your pension is 15,500 Rand a month. This is a massive difference between preserving and not preserving. So again, not preserving, unemployed for 4 years, pension 2,400 Rand a month. With preserving, a pension of 15,500 Rand a month. So you can see there's a massive, massive difference between preserving and between not preserving. And that's why government has decided that they want to bring in compulsory preservation with the two-pot system. So it's a very, very important part of the two-pot system, and it can actually make a very, very big difference when you finally retire. If you look, for example, at the 10 years of unemployment, even if you're unemployed for 10 years, you can still end up with the 13,000 Rand a month pension because of compulsory preservation. All right, so up to this point, we've looked at the two factors separately. We looked at withdrawals from your savings pot, and we looked at preservation or compulsory preservation. What we're going to do now is combine these two to look at the total full picture under the two-pot system. So here, it's showing combining withdrawals and preservation. The greens are good outcomes. Your oranges are sort of medium case outcomes, and your reds are bad outcomes, which are the same as now or worse than the current situation. So what does this show me? You can see there's a variety of outcomes, right? So you can still get good outcomes with the two-pot system, but you can also get very bad outcomes as well. If you look at the 100% withdrawal, so this means that you are taking out everything from your savings pot. There are no green outcomes here, which means that if you take out everything from your savings pot, you will guarantee that you're going to end up with a poor outcome. If you look at the left-hand side with 0% withdrawal, you can see there's most of the greens are here. So if you don't take out anything from your savings pot, you've got a good chance of a very good outcome, even if you're unemployed for a long period of time. So here, as I said before, even if you're unemployed for 10 years, if you don't access your savings pot, you can still end up with a very good outcome. However, with the 50% withdrawal, you can see there's still a good chance of a good outcome. There still are some greens. So you can still be unemployed for, say, up to 4 years and still end up with a good outcome. But unfortunately, if you're unemployed for a very long period of time, then you're going to have a poor outcome. So what are the takeaways from this? What are we seeing? The two-pot system is a powerful tool, and it puts decision-making in the hands of the member. It's probably like never before. So there's a powerful decision the members have to make. What am I going to take out from my savings pot? If you take out too much from your savings pot, you're going to guarantee a poor outcome. However, if you use your savings pot in a responsible manner and only use it for emergency access or when you desperately need it, then you can withdraw from your savings pot and still end up with a good outcome in that you can retire comfortably. That's very important that members understand this, and they understand that there are consequences to the decisions. Nothing comes for free. If you want to take out money from your savings pot, it'll mean that you're going to have less when you actually end up leaving. Thank you very much. That's it from me. I don't think we're going to do questions now. I think we're doing it at the end, but thanks. That's everything from my side.
Thank you so much, Subedra. That was a lovely presentation. I see why you got those raving reviews. It was simple, down to it. We got the numbers quite simple, So thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole.
So next, we're going to move on to our next speaker. He is Thato Dikgale. He is the Executive Head of Investment Consulting, and he's going to talk to us about the two-pot investment strategies. So his presentation is going to be quite crucial, especially to someone like me. As an attorney, numbers and I are not very favorable, so we're looking at our money guru for some guidance. Also, just remember to post your questions in the chat, and we will revert to them towards the end of the presentation. And if not, we will also provide you with an email address. Remember that NBC will also be open to requests, and you can do it through your consultants or liaisons if you would like any further training or presentations done to your board or your members as well. So Thato, thank you so much. Take it away.
Thanks, Nicole. Morning, everyone. I know that I've been put on the graveyard shift, but I don't think it's an indication in any way on how less important my topic is, because I do think it's quite important that we give some guidance to trustees in as far as their readiness in rating their assets and looking at how the investments of the funds are positioned to take advantage of, or rather to cater for these pots and the various pots starting from 1 March 2024. Just to give you some background, I know that my colleagues have already touched on a lot of this, but I do think before I start talking to how the assets need to be positioned, we need to just talk about what are these pots and which pots need to be catered for and how. So as you're aware, my colleagues have already touched on this, that Treasury has proposed the two system, which now allows members, right, to save 1/3 of the retirement contribution in some pot, which is known as your savings pot. And then you have 2/3 that gets accumulated into your retirement bucket, okay, which can't be touched. As a result, we obviously have to now track performance of all of these pots, because essentially members on the system will now have 3 records under their name. So you'll have your vested pot, which you've had before 1 March 2024, and then you have your savings pot, which is the new pot, as well as the retirement pot. Now, obviously, the underpin investment for all of these are quite important, and we need to track the performance of all of them. I think more importantly, your fund investment policy, is definitely going to be impacted from a governance point of view, as it now has to specify the impact of these default portfolios, given all that has been covered by my colleagues, especially with Tubeja having highlighted the impacts of withdrawing from a lot of these limits. The other thing that will be very severely impacted is, of course, all the funds investment strategies, because we now have to accommodate for the potential liquidity changes. I'm just thinking about some of the big funds. I mean, if you have a big scheme with 1,000 members, where members do have very healthy benefits in their invested pot, and everyone does go out and cash out at the max, we do have an event that we obviously have to make sure the assets of the fund can cater for. Now, the impact on implementation date, the first point there highlights that retirement fund members will be able to access the seed capital, which is a portion of the available balance come 1 March. Now, how we fund that, remember, and this is your seedings pot, we have to fund it by some kind of a rule, and the rules that we've been given currently is that the seeding is going to be a minimum of 2,000 Rand or 10,000 of your vested component. So it's what you have in your savings leading up to the 29th February 2024. But that 10% is going to be kept at 25,000. Remember, we need to do this so that your savings pot come 1 March starts on some kind of a balance. Okay. Now, going forward, the 2 new pots, which is your savings pot and your retirement pot, will continue to enjoy contributions, whereas your vested pot just grows by investment growth. So the 2 new pots, which are your savings pot and your retirement pot, will get 1/3 contribution, and the retirement pot gets the 2/3 contributions, but they also grow by investment return. Okay. Now, money withdrawn as a seed capital 1 March will be subjected to the member's marginal income tax rate. I won't spend much time here. I think my colleagues have explored that quite extensively. Members can only withdraw once in every 12-month cycle. And we've seen from my previous colleague what the impacts of that is. So I thought maybe graphs do it better, because I always find pictures explain this a lot better than us speaking in big terms. So essentially, come 1 March 2024, each member is going to essentially have 3 records under their name. The first pot, if you have a look, is your vested pot, and the underpin there will continue to be as it is currently. So if your fund is in a life stage structure that, where the assets are de-risked as members are getting older, a lot of that's still going to stay same as the same underpin. We now have these 2 new pots that we have to take into consideration. Remember that your savings pot gets 1/3 of your contribution going forward. So from 1 March, these are the only 2 pots that are going to continue to get contributions. And that is your savings pot, which gets 1/3, and the retirement pot, which gets 2/3 of your contribution. Now, your retirement pot, remember, this one can't be touched. So essentially, try and think of it in that, it's the part of your investment or the part of your asset that's just going to grow by the contributions, the bulk of your contributions, but also cannot really be withdrawn until you get to retirement. Now, because this is a long-term investment and you cannot access it, it will also remain in a market-linked balance portfolio. So in other words, obviously within the prescript of Reg 28, in that you cannot obviously invest outside of Reg 28, all of these investments have to be compliant with Reg 28. But this portfolio obviously has to try and use as many of the asset classes that are investable to get you as good a return as you can, because this is your long-term investment pot, if you like. Now, the savings pot, there's been a lot of deliberations in the industry as to how do we treat this pot, okay? And my next slide is going to explain why our view is as such at NBC. Remember that members have the option to withdraw once a year in every 12-month cycles. Now, what that means is if this portfolio was to sit in a highly liquid cash money market portfolio, it would actually over time start to create what we call a cash drag in your performance. So you'd be giving up some kind of an opportunity cost in as far as the returns that you can be earning here if this pot is made too conservative in nature. So our view is that you should actually try and match your retirement pot in as far as the kind of investment that gets used as the underpin for your savings pot. However, it does come with a caveat. We want to try and not have exposure or avoid exposure to the less liquid asset classes. And if you think about it, the reality of it is because members will be exercising or may exercise the option every 12 months to withdraw some portion of the savings pot, one would be tempted to want to place it. Obviously, one needs to put it in more liquid assets. Okay. However, we do not want to create a situation where the earnings here are so materially different from the retirement pot. So we will not put it only in a cash fund. It has to still be exposed to as many of the asset classes as it can, just to take advantage of market returns. However, we do want to limit exposure to any illiquid asset classes, because if members want to, withdraw at any given point, we want to be able to, cater for those demands. My next slide, and I know it looks very busy and technical, but just to explain why we think those underpins of the investments have to be that way. Now, the bottom chart there, which is a table, shows you, the annualized returns of the various asset classes. So we have, just to go through by the cursor, we have the bond market, we have the equity market, we have the offshore equity market, we have the South African listed property index, we have the cash proxy, so in other words, cash instruments and how they perform. And then we have inflation, okay, which is the single most important indicator, right? Because that's the buying power of money. So when we talk investments, we're always worried about what is where's inflation and what's the outlook for inflation. Now, if you have a look over a track record of about 15 years, I could have gone back even as 20 years. Over a 15-year cycle, you can see that the inflation number has set around an average annualized return of around 5%, 5.19%. Now, if your underpin for your savings pot was to sit purely in cash, can you see that the potential earnings are only sitting at 6.47%, just a marginal increase above inflation? Now, this would introduce a big cash drag. Hence, we're saying your savings underpot still has to try and take advantage of all these opportunities. I mean, look at what you possibly are giving up in earnings if we have to put that portfolio purely in a cash portfolio. Hence, the motivation that we should still be, the underpin of your savings pot should still be as competitive as possible. However, we have to be mindful of the fact that because members will be drawing down, various amounts at any given time within a 12-month cycle, it does also need to avoid some of the illiquid asset classes. And we all know that over long periods of time, cash investments do tend to struggle against inflation. I mean, if you look at the various other times, you can see that there are times where cash does underperform inflation. And so this just shows the motivation why even the savings pot does need to be as competitive as possible. However, because of the liquidity requirements, it does have to limit its exposure to unlisted investments. So for most funds, given that withdrawals are kept, the traditional balance fund will remain the most appropriate investment underpin. Funds, however, this is one of the important points on this slide. We need to then now assess, the likely impact of those withdrawals on the date of implementation of the two-pot. So, like I said in the example, if you have a big fund that has 1,000 members and they all have very healthy benefits in their vested pots, and everyone meets the 25,000 cap, you're looking at a 25 million possible withdrawal that can happen within that 12-month cycle. Obviously, this varies for various industries. I know there are some funds where, the members' contributions and some of their benefits are not as healthy as others. But obviously, it will be a case-by-case scenario where we'll look at all the funds, the impact of what that liquidity would look like and how much we need to place in the savings pot to meet that requirement. We all know, because of the poor savings culture that we have in the investment industry, or rather the pension fund industry, a lot of members will exercise this benefit for various reasons. So we need to just make sure we cater for that in that savings pot going forward. So in the event that the three pots are anticipated to differ significantly in the composition and the investment horizon, it obviously will be important for us to make sure that those underpins of the three buckets meet the needs that are required. The first point is also very important. Just in conclusion, the reality of it is, as much as it means, government is trying to meet the needs of the members, the reality of it is, as Subedra has shown you in your previous presentation, it does lower the savings of members over time because of the nature of the investment that underpins that savings pot. And if members are going to actively, continuously withdraw every 12-month cycle, you will expect that the long-term performance of members' benefits are going to be quite severely impacted. And so I think the communication needs to be clear to members that if you do not need to access these assets, rather leave them invested, transfer the savings into the retirement pot and have limited access to these monies, because the retirement pot is so well positioned to earn as much returns as it can, because it will take advantage of all the various asset classes that are out there, including some of the unlisted asset classes, which of course the savings pot can't at the moment. I think it's very important that we make that clear. So going forward as NBC, we'll definitely be addressing the investment policy statement as well as the investment strategies to take advantage of, rather to be positioned to make sure that they, the wordings in these documents and the implementation of how the assets will be treated does make provision for the three pots. So this is something we'll carry out in these last few meetings leading up to 1 March to make sure that come 1 March, the funds are positioned to effectively address this this new regime, and to also make sure that the assets are being catered for. So the seeding of these savings, of the savings pot. And also, I think the most important here being communication strategies do need to be put in place to try and preserve or to limit members from actually withdrawing unnecessarily from the savings pot. And so I think a lot of us need to work together as stakeholders of these pension funds to make sure that if members do not need to exercise the savings pot, instead members should actually be incentivized to try and move more assets out of the savings pot into the retirement pot, because these are essentially pension assets and they should really cater for retirement. But obviously we know that there will be times that members need to access these monies, and so as pension funds going forward, we can definitely assist you to be positioned for that. But at the same time, we don't want to introduce that cash drag by having the assets, even in the savings pot, sitting purely in money market assets. We need to be quite mindful and careful to try and take advantage of the asset classes that are out there and all the investment opportunities that are available. This is the end of my presentation. We'll take questions at the end. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Tado. That was quite insightful, and hopefully our viewers also thought so. We have quite a few questions, particularly for our last two presenters. So if we can just have up Subedra and Tado, I will just pose the questions. They will appear on screen. And let's start with the first question. The first question is to Subedra. What do you mean by taking too much from savings because the withdrawal amount is capped?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So remember, there is no saving cap in terms of your savings pot. So what goes into your savings pots will be 1/3 of your contributions, and you put that 1/3 of your contributions in every year, and that savings pot will grow with those contributions and whatever investment return is earned. So even if it grows to R1 million in your savings pot, you can take out the full R1 million from your savings pot. So there's no cap in terms of your savings pot. When you talk about taking out too much, essentially, as I said in the slides, if you take out everything from your savings pot, you will guarantee that you're going to have a poor retirement outcome. So you need to be very careful that you take out a reasonable amount from that savings pot, preferably only for emergency situations. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you. So the next question is, can the retirement pot investment strategy match that of the vested pot investment strategy? That one is for you, Tato.
Thanks, Nicole. The short answer to that is yes, it definitely can. Remember that the two pots are more long-term based, being your vested pot and your retirement pot. Those are the ones that have a long-term view. So those can definitely match each other. In most instances, we're going to advise a lot of clients to match those so that we take as much advantage of the available asset classes that are out there and the various investment opportunities. The careful consideration has to be made more for the savings pot, because this is the one that has to have some level of liquidity. But like I said, we do not also want to have it purely in low interest bearing type of instruments. That one still has to also be try to take advantage of whatever opportunities are out there, except we want to avoid some of the illiquid assets there. So the answer to that is yes, your retirement pot and your vested pot can have the same underpin in as far as these investments are concerned.
All right, thank you. I think that was simple enough to understand. So the next question is, and I think this one's for you, Tato, as well. If we accept that a big chunk of assets will be disinvested to pay the savings withdrawals, what must the fund do to be prepared in terms of liquidity?
Thank you. So my department, as well as with our colleagues in the actuarial department, we will be looking at worst case scenarios. So what we're already doing just in the background is some of the work, just to let the trustees and some of our clients know, is that we're looking at a worst case scenario. So based on what we know is the current vested pots, we can sort of come to some kind of an estimate of what the lump sum will look like that will be required if people were to exercise the full amount that's allowable. So in other words, 10% of the vested cap, or capped at the 25% for seeding. Remember, this is just for seeding that savings pot. Not everyone will obviously exercise this option at the same time, which is also part of the complexity. But we do have to, come 1 March, everyone has to have these pots. Okay. So what we are doing in the background, we're working on estimates to see how much will be required. And we'll advise all boards of trustees on the way forward for, obviously disinvesting these assets, because they do need to be, removed, or rather disinvested from the vested pot and placed in some kind of a savings pot. Hence, I stressed that, the underpin of that savings pot, it mustn't be too materially different from the other two pots, if you like. However, we want to limit exposure to any illiquid asset class, so that if a member does exercise the option of withdrawing, we can easily meet some of these demands.
Thank you, Tato. We'll move on to our next question. I think this one's for you, Tato, as well. The 2/3 retirement pots left behind, will they be invested differently? I think you've covered this, but if you could just clarify again.
Okay, I think we've covered this, right? So the retirement pot, remember, is for long term. This is the pot that members are not going to be able to touch until retirement. So think of this as your long-term savings pot, not savings, let me not use the same word, but it's your long-term pension benefit. Similar to that vested portion, we must try and think of these as long-term investment vehicles. So like I said, this one will be, as status quo is now, will be invested in balanced, market balanced or market linked balanced funds that basically take advantage of all the asset classes that are out there, obviously within the prescript of Reg 28, because we do not want to be in breach of Reg 28, but essentially think of that 2/3, the contributions of the 2/3 that go into your retirement pot, that is an untouchable long-term investment view. So that will continue as per the case is now. The only consideration that we really need to think about as funds is that savings pot, and a lot more time has to be spent around that.
All right. Thank you to Tato and Subedra. Those are the questions that we can take for now. Any further questions can be emailed to nbcwebinar@nbc.co.za. We have one last question, and I think this one will go to our Executive Head of Legal Services, Liep van Zyl. And the question is, what is the rationale behind 10% versus 25,000? Why do they not put the capping figure 25,000 only because of benefit above irrespective of how high is the contribution?
Yeah, so this is a complex question, but I'm going to rely on the explanatory memo that National Treasury published together with the legislation. And the words that they used is they wanted to avoid a liquidity crisis. So in other words, if the seeding capital was set at a higher amount, let's say 15% or 20%, it theoretically would have meant that a much bigger amount of assets would be transferred into the savings pots, which could potentially have led to a liquidity crisis across all retirement funds in South Africa. I think that's a valid concern. Whether it will stay as 10% capped at 25,000 Rand, I can't tell you. That is still subject to negotiation, and is probably one of the reasons why the final legislation has not been promulgated yet. So this is the very last question that came in. Will fund members have a choice to remain with the current arrangement, or will it be compulsory to split into two-pot system? We have dealt with that previously. It's compulsory. So all members will be by default moved into this position, with the exception, of course, of members who are 57 years old on 1 March 2024. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Lieb. Just before we go off, do you have any final words before I do the final housekeeping, just to inform everyone of what's coming next?
So I just wanted to say one last remark. We did address the CPD certificate issue. I shouldn't even probably call it an issue, but what normally happens is we send our material that we present at the legal seminars to a third-party accreditation, who then awards a CPD score to the content. Why didn't we do it this time? It's because we were waiting for the final legislation. We were keeping our fingers crossed that we would have received the final legislation by now. It hasn't happened. We can't control that. So what we'll do now is we'll send the presentation and the material as it was presented today. It takes roughly 2 weeks to get accreditation. We'll push them to do it sooner. We have records of all the people who attended the seminar. We also have records of people who go and view the video later, because we'll make the link available to you, and we will make sure that you get your CPD certificates. Just bear with us. We couldn't provide it immediately, as I explained. We were hoping that we'd have the final legislation by today. Thanks, Nicole.
All right, thank you for that, Lieb. So I'll be closing off. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We really value your participation into today's event. We hope that you at least got some sort of information, some guidance in terms of this two-part system. It's quite complex and it's quite a tricky subject to understand. So we always want to remind you that as your service provider to all our clients, to all our stakeholders, all the different departments at NBC provide support, training, and guidance to our Board of Trustees, and whatever kind of support or training that you require to your members as well. You just need to reach out to us and we will gladly provide you with any type of support or training that you may need for your team. So just to close off, Lieb has already summarized the CPD points. Remember that even if you're not watching this live, if you're watching this as a recording, it will be available as a link later on. You will be required to watch the entirety of the video to qualify for CPD accreditation. All of the individual unique logins will be registered, and therefore once we get those points finalized, everyone who has actually watched the entire video will be sent that link to download their CPD certificates. Also remember, please, that any queries, remember to email it to nbcwebinar@nbc.co.za regarding today's session. And we also have a quick survey at the end of the session, just for everyone who attended, to provide us with their feedback, any improvements, compliments. We would love to hear from you. So if you could take out just 2 minutes of your time after this, just to fill in that presentation, any notes that you have for us, we'll gladly receive it as well. And lastly, I'd like to just mention that NBC is also working on providing this kind of platform to everyone. So soon enough, you'll be seeing that NBC will be providing everyone with a YouTube channel. So please be on the lookout for that. We will also provide further correspondence regarding that. And that's where you'll be able to access a lot more information and a lot more informative videos should you require them. So for me, Nicole, thank you so much. And I know from all of our presenters today, we thoroughly enjoyed having the opportunity to speak to all of our delegates. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.